Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a text titled The Folly of the Self-Sufficient Spirit. Within its pages, we find three incredibly grim, mythic fables that just perfectly capture the tragic irony of mortal pride. We're going to explore the ultimate, devastating consequences of isolation and really look at what happens when a creation turns against its own genesis.
So what actually happens when a creation completely forgets its fundamental sources of life? It's a pretty haunting question about the roots of our existence, isn't it? We're going to trace the dark path that unfolds when we intentionally sever those roots in this blind pursuit of absolute independence. Let's start with Parable 1, the clay vessel, which is all about misunderstanding the source. Our first fable begins in a master artisan's workshop. Picture this magnificent clay vessel sitting proudly atop the highest shelf. It's molded with these intricate curves, hardened by fire, and filled right to the brim with sweet, life-giving water that sustains everyone in the house. And for a time, it served its designated purpose flawlessly.
But as the household kept praising this refreshing water, the vessel's heart swelled with an arrogant pride. Looking down at all the other tools in the workshop, it completely forgot about the stream that actually filled it and the hands that shaped its clay. Instead, it proudly declared itself the fundamental anchor of life in the estate.
And here is the fatal delusion. The vessel actually began to believe its cool temperature and pure taste were its own self-generated inherent strengths. It literally envisioned itself as this self-contained perfection. But the humbling reality? It was merely a container, entirely reliant on an outside hand and a fresh, continuous supply of water. Let's look at the consequences of this isolation. Seeking to prove its independent power, the vessel made a fatal choice. It sealed its own opening. Refusing to acknowledge it was just a container, this isolation proved ruinous. Deprived of the artisan's fresh supply, the water inside quickly grew stagnant, foul, and bitter. The illusion of independent power literally rotted the beautiful clay from the inside out until it just cracked under its own dry pressure. Now, that was a very intimate, domestic tragedy. But what happens when this blind pride expands beyond a quiet shelf, projecting itself out onto the chaotic, massive forces of nature? This brings us to Parable 2, the rogue wave, focusing on the I will mentality. We move out to the open ocean. Deep in the sea, a massive crest arises during a seasonal storm. It reaches this majestic, towering height, brilliantly supported by sweeping global winds and ancient, deep marine currents, a true marvel of natural harmony. But, looking down at the surrounding tides, the crest grew deeply resentful of having to follow the moon's pull. Driven by self-centered ambition, the wave shouted this defiant declaration to the open air. I will command my own direction, and I will break free from the ocean's ancient law. Think about the dangerous philology of hubris going on here, that absolute, blinding obsession with the word I. It entirely rejected the fluid harmony of its world. The delusion here is wild. The wave wanted to establish itself as the absolute center of its own universe, genuinely believing it could redefine the coastline by sheer force alone. It totally rejected the reality of its situation, the deep currents and lunar poles that gave it its majestic form in the first place. So gathering its stolen force, it crashed violently toward a jagged, rocky shore. But without the backing of the deep ocean, its attempt to conquer the land ended in incredibly swift destruction. The so-called independent wave shattered instantly against the unyielding stone, dissolving into meaningless, scattered foam. As you can see, the illusion of a self-made reality vanishes instantly when it collides with natural law. We've seen the rebellion of the earth and the sea, but what if this delusion of grandeur reaches upward, attempting to rival the cosmos itself? Let's look at Parable 3, the spark and the stars, which perfectly illustrates the pursuit of false equality. On a high mountain peak, a small campfire is crackling under a vast, brilliant night sky. From that fire, a tiny, bright spark flies upward into the evening breeze. It's small and strictly temporary, but it burns bright against the dark. Looking up at the celestial vault, the spark didn't feel awe. Instead, it felt a burning envy of the eternal constellations. Driven by this intense pride, the spark vowed to bridge the gap, declaring that through its own fierce effort, it would make itself equal to the highest stars. The spark was entirely deluded, believing it could achieve equal status with the cosmos through sheer will.
In doing so, it completely ignored its reality, its absolute reliance on the earthly fuel of the burning wood below and the evening air that was carrying it. It attempted to force its way higher, completely untethered from its source.
And now, witness the inevitable collapse of this cosmic ambition. First, the spark burns through its tiny energy supply. Then, drifting further from its source of warmth, its bright light fades to a faint glimmer. Its heat turns ice cold. And finally, before it even clears the branches of the mountain trees, it burns out entirely, falling back to earth as a speck of black dust.
The inevitable collapse of the self-deluded. When we step back and look at all three of these stories together, a chilling pattern emerges. Whether it's a clay vessel, a rogue wave, or a fading spark, the core truth remains exactly the same. Lost humility ultimately destroys the soul, severing it from the very things that give it life.
Every single character we've examined follows this exact tragic progression. First, receiving a gift. Second, swelling with pride to claim it as their own. Third, intentionally severing the source. And finally, experiencing grim, inevitable decay. Internal strength literally always turns to rot when it's isolated from its true source.
Breaking this down across the domains of earth, sea, and sky, we see individual ambition contrasted directly against natural cosmic laws. The vessel sealed its opening and met dry rot. The wave broke the deep current and became shattered foam. The spark forced its elevation and turned to black dust. Nature's ancient laws remain entirely unyielding against mortal hubris.
So we want to leave you with a haunting dialogue on our own human frailty. When you consider the cracked clay, the shattered wave, and the freezing dust, where are you ignoring the deep currents that support your own life? True strength isn't found in the illusion of absolute independence, but in honoring our fragile, vital connections. Reflect on your sources and beware the quiet temptation to seal off your own vessel. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.